Hey guys, we'll try to keep things on schedule here. Sorry to interrupt any good conversation. Who here has actually been to the Cloud Identity Summit before? Okay. And who here actually knows who the National Cybersecurity Center of Excellence is? All right, now, wait, keep your hands up, keep your hands up. And if you are with NIST, put your hand down. Okay. Or a grant or a pilot awardee. Okay, so that's kind of what I've expected. I figure I'll start you guys off with a just brief overview of the Center of Excellence and sort of who we are and what we do. When I typically do that, I get a lot of questions, especially in these crowds who are very technically savvy and are working on the vendor space on the administrative model and how we operate it. I will punt on all those questions now because I want to get into some of the projects and talk about the good work we're doing, but I figure it'll serve as an interesting context. So the next couple of speaking slots in this track will be focused on the Center of Excellence. And this first one here will do multi-factor authentication, and then we'll do some mobile single sign-on stuff. So to introduce myself, my name is Bill Fisher. I am one of the security engineers at the National Cybersecurity Center of Excellence. That's sort of a fancy name for I do a lot of industry engagement. I do a lot of working with our internal staff and our MITRE team to take products from cradle to grave. Projects from cradle to grave, and I also own the entire technical agenda in the NIST SPs that have my name on it. So if you're familiar with NIST, if you were the lead author on a document, you owned every single technical word in there. So I am not the best person to answer all types of questions, but I will do my best to handle whatever questions might come up. I will say that for this particular project here, multi-factor authentication for e-commerce, I am presenting on behalf of my colleague Bill Newhouse. If you're familiar with Bill, he is the one who's leading this project. And I'll go a little more into detail around the end of this on how individuals can get involved in this effort. So just to briefly go over the Cybersecurity Center of Excellence, we are in what's called the Applied Cybersecurity Division of NIST. So if you're familiar with NIST, you're probably familiar with a lot of this work the Computer Security Division does. The 800 series documents fall in there, 853, 863, and that's all great work. The Applied Cybersecurity Division of NIST fundamentally is not about actually developing those standards, but applying those standards, right? So the name is pretty self-explanatory there. And at the Center of Excellence, we have this sort of public-private model that we use to do that. And so what we do is we go out to conferences like this. We go out to various industry consortiums or wherever a particular industry might congregate, and we ask industry what their cybersecurity challenges are. So if you went to our website, you'll see we're doing a lot of work. This one here in particular is for e-commerce or what we call our sort of retail sector. But if you have interest in energy, or interest in health IT, or interest in financials. We're working with all those communities, and we're doing various projects for those communities. The one I'll present after this is actually public safety first responder community. So we work within a diverse set of sectors within industry. And so that's a pretty big difference, actually, from the Computer Security Division, who many of their documents are actually required for federal non-national security systems. They're doing a lot of work with other government agencies. We do a lot of work with industry, and the guidance that we put out is for industry. So our basic business model is once we've engaged industry and we come up with that cybersecurity challenge, we then work with industry. We then work with IT vendors, security vendors, industry subject matter experts, and standards and best practice developers to come up with a solution that uses commercially available standards, technology, and get into our lab environment and build out a reference design. So what you're going to see here today is a project that we got directly from the retail sector. What you'll see after this presentation is a project we got directly from public safety first responders. They're telling us this is what keeps us up at night. This is what we want. We would like you guys to work on and help us with. And you'll see in each project that we are at different stages. This project's a little earlier on. The one later, you'll see we actually have a demo for you guys, so that's exciting. And then at the end of our projects, we publish a special publication as well, but we're under the Center of Excellence, we publish an 1800 series document, so 1800. So I like to joke with most of our CSD colleagues that we're one better than them because they put out the 800 series. So with that quick introduction, I will jump right into the presentation. If you have any questions about the center and sort of what we do, how we operate, and how you can get involved as a member of industry, you'll see my face here all week at CIS, and right after this 12 o'clock presentation block, I'll be happy to take questions. So multi-factor authentication for e-commerce. So as I mentioned, this is and it looks like these slides are a little off. I apologize. I tested them right on my Mac a second ago. So if anybody wants these slides, feel free to ask me afterwards, and I will be happy to send them to you. So as I said, we get all of our projects directly from industry. And so the origin for this project was actually back in 2015. The White House asked us to co-host a workshop, cybersecurity workshop with them out at Stanford University in Palo Alto. And they wanted us to engage retailers. You might recall this was right after the big Target breach. So there was a big focus on retail security, PCI compliance, all that type of stuff. And so we held a workshop out there, and one of the things they came back to us was with multi-factor authentication, and then also the other theme you'll hear here is web analytics or risk analytics. So a combination of just multi-factor authentication and web analytics to give these companies some confidence in the identity of their user base, and then also in the behavior of the users being in line with some threshold. So the need for this really actually spawned from some of the more recent chip and pin and chip and signature adoption that's happening within the United States, right? So if everybody's familiar with that, it's the transition has pretty well occurred now. I think there was a deadline of sometime in 2017 for retailers to switch over. And so the thought was, great, we implement this great new chip technology at the point of sale devices. We make people insert their cards. It takes a little bit longer. You know, if my Trader Joe's experience is probably like an extra 30 seconds longer than it was before. But we get some great security benefits there. But as we know, that's not the entire attack surface for consumers. And so there's an anticipation that if we make things harder in one spot, that anybody who is looking to get consumer payment information will go to the low-hanging fruit, and that may end up being actually the card not present scenario, right, where that chip and pin is not quite covering the attack surface there. And so the goal here was to look at that card not present scenario, look at that e-commerce transaction scenario, and to see what we could do to help out the risk scenarios there. And so the project goals here are to, as I already sort of mentioned, implement multi-factor authentication. And I will say this, if you are not familiar with NIST 863R3, the e-authentication document that is currently out in draft form, we tend to align all of our definitions with that document. So I'm not going to provide a whole lot of context for the vernacular here. I would reference to that document if anybody has questions. I know there can be some interesting clarification points that people like to make around terminology. So implementing multi-factor authentication for e-commerce transactions and tie that into what their existing web analytics might be, and then maybe look at some additional contextual information that might be relevant to making some risk decisions around stepping up authentication, right? So if the user has an initial like PIN and password, a set of signals might allow you to say, hey, I want to right now, before I let this transaction happen, step them up to a second factor or something else that you have a little more confidence in. Or maybe you just want to make them re-authenticate. Maybe they've already used two factors, and you have such confidence in your signals that that this user is really abnormal in their behavior. Like, let's say they've logged in with two factors, but they're immediately, using a $500 Amazon gift card to buy the, two or three Chromebooks. That seems out of place. Step up to that. And of course, because we're the Center of Excellence, we want to help them do this with standards and best practices. So you'll hear a theme of that throughout this talk. And we also want to, we have a requirement to do it with commercially available technology. So if you're an IT or a security vendor in this room, and as I talk through this slide deck, you see a spot where you think your product would fit in particularly well, the questions you're going to get from me are, that thing better be through beta testing, better be GA'd, better be commercially available, that type of thing. So I'll run you through three different scenarios here that we are looking to demonstrate with this build. I should say before I get into the scenarios that we are still with this project at the point where we're designing an architecture. So at the end of this presentation, when we have time for questions, I'd also love to hear some comments from my colleagues who are running this project around architecture design scenarios or maybe different use cases that might also be of interest to this community. So scenario number one is sort of a typical repeat customer, repeat context, right? So this is a scenario where the user already has an account that's been established with this entity, already has a regular baseline for the activity that they engage with that entity, right? Like, if a couple has a newly born and every 3 weeks, they're going on to Amazon Prime and ordering diapers, right? After 2 or 3 times of doing that, that's going to really make a lot of sense because they're probably also ordering baby formulas and all the other stuff that goes along with that. I'm actually thinking of that crazy scenario where the father found out about the daughter being pregnant from Target because Target used their web analytics to discover she was in her second trimester. That's something to Google for later on. And so in this case, when it's a repeat customer with a repeat context, it's very typical activity. The user experience would be pretty much uninhibited. This would be a case where they log in with their username and password. They would, in this scenario, there would be options, for second factors of authentication for very security-centric consumers, right? FIDO and some other standards make that really easy. But in reality, this is just your plain Jane scenario where a user authenticates and the actual service provider here, the retailer, has a good level of confidence in that particular transaction. Scenario 2 would be a little bit more akin to the Chromebooks that I was talking about. So this would be a repeat customer, but a new context, right? An individual is buying something that is not in line with what they typically purchase, right? So you could envision a scenario where maybe this happens right at the very beginning of Christmas time, right? When you're buying gifts for everybody, and the retailer might say, I think it's been a while. I want to re-authenticate that individual and maybe bring a second factor into play here. Or you could just imagine a time where the user's just buying something that's out of line with what they would typically buy, and especially if it's out of price range with what they would typically buy. And so in this case, the user would actually be prompted for a second factor, right? So at the time they want to purchase, they may have to put in their username and password again, because that often happens if you haven't done that for a while. And then they may have to put in a second factor of authentication. Maybe it's something like YubiKey. Maybe it's something like an out-of-band SMS message, something like that. And then the user would be granted access, right? So the user if they present that second factor, if they successfully authenticate, then the provider, the service provider in this case, goes, great, we have the level of confidence we need now. We'll let that user continue on with that purchase. And then the scenario 3 would be a fraud scenario, right? This would be an example where a user comes in and they are logging in with a valid user account, likely with a single factor, but their activity is really abnormal, right? I mean, if they're logging in with a credit card and suddenly buying like $2,000 worth of Amazon gift cards that aren't going to be traceable later, then that's probably going to be a big indicator. If they're coming from an IP address or network location that really jumps around a lot, that could potentially be another indicator. And so this would be a case where, again, the user would be prompted for a second factor, but if the system is working properly and the crypto and the hardware-based security tokens and the second factors are implemented properly, the user wouldn't actually be able to authenticate there. They would end up with a failed authentication and unsuccessfully logging in. So those are the 3 scenarios we're looking at for this project currently that we would like to demonstrate with commercially available technology for this effort. The component walkthrough. So I'll walk you through what we generally think is going to require to make this type of architecture a reality, the types of components that we think are generally going to be needed in order to handle the 3 scenarios that we just outlined. Again, this is still a bit open to interpretation. We are currently working with industry right now to see what is the current what currently technology is available, commercially available, and what standards and best practices really have traction or should have traction in this community. The first piece is actually, and this sounds kind of trivial, but a good user and e-commerce platform, right? So one of the things that we're trying to do with our builds is we want to demo something, we want to make it as lively, as real world as possible. And so we need data do this happen, make this happen, we need interfaces to make this happen, both web interfaces and mobile app interfaces to make this happen. And so we realize that the user experience is going to be a core part of this project, right? I think everybody who talks about authentication in a consumer side will sort of hear about the keeping up with the Joneses, right? We need to do enough to make sure that we're secure as the industry, as the rest of our industry best practices and competition is, and we don't want to do anything that would inhibit the user experience such that they may start using someone else's service rather than ours. So that comes down even to the actual e-commerce platform and the user interaction there. So we actually need that component. We're looking for individuals now who can supply some robust data that they might allow us to do some of the analytics on, and has a really good interface for handling the secondary prompts that would be required for the multi-factor authentication, that type of thing. And so the back end behind that would be that web analytics piece. And so here we're really looking to do that fraud analysis, and we're looking to monitor the behavior of the user and then certain things about the session of the user that might actually give us an indication that something might not be quite right. So in some cases, we've talked with people who have adaptive authentication solutions, risk engines, various different scoring mechanisms. There's a lot of interesting technology there, but again, we need some real-world websites so we can generate some data. And we can actually do some of this, monitor for threats, look at user behavior. Patterns of clicking, right? If a user typically spends, if they're logging in to their account and they typically look at their order history, their wish list first, right? When the secondary user logs in, or the fraudulent user logs in, they go directly to buying something. That might be a big indicator. So we're looking at that type of behavioral monitoring. And then the web analytics and risk engine platform, and we have these separate for now because that's what we've heard from industry. But there's potential that one product could handle both of these. It's likely that the web analytics piece, at least from what we've found, is that a lot of retailers already have web analytics. Even some federated identities that might be used in this scenario might have some web analytics as well. So I've had conversations with a few banks, for instance, who want to get into the IDP world, and they have web analytics that they could use and federate some of those attributes for that session. And then a risk engine platform. Some area where this information can be aggregated, where a risk decision can be made, and where policy can be established, right? So I've seen many models for this. Some have risk scores that go from 0 to 1,000. Some just give you a simple ordinal, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Some are the red, green, yellow. But here we're looking for flexibility in terms of being able to ingest information, being able to make that risk decision, and being able to provide the correct dials for the actual retail entity to set up that policy, so that they can look at their user base, they can understand what their security expectations are, they can understand what the risk tolerance is, and then dial that in. And then, of course, we need a multi-factor authentication solution. And so here, this is again an area where the user experience is really important. And so we would like to demonstrate a diversity of authenticators here, right? So we're aware that, hey, maybe using the phone as your second factor is a great idea, but it doesn't work so well if you don't have good connectivity, right? We're all aware of that scenario. So maybe something like a YubiKey or some other FIDO U2F external hardware-backed token might be the right scenario there. And then to go along with this, not just the authentication, but also the registration process, right? It's one thing when you're getting a token from your IT staff and they'll walk you through that entire registration. It's another thing when, as the user, you're going to be setting it up yourself, right? So imagine your grandma trying to set up a FIDO token. Do you think she'd be able to do that? Do we have clear prompts? Can she scan a QR code? That type of thing. So we'll look to demonstrate a diverse set of scenarios there. So getting back to true NIST form, we will absolutely be leveraging standards here. As I mentioned before, 863 revision 3 is currently in draft form. We'll be doing a lot of referencing to that document. You're probably all, if you're at the Cloud Identity Summit, almost everybody here I think should be aware of FIDO, Fast Identity Online. is a protocol for helping to make two-factor authentication ubiquitous. Right now, we're looking at a U2F scenario, but UAF would not be off the table. So for those not familiar, U2F is FIDO as a second factor, so PIN and password plus U2F. For the UAF piece, that would be a more core biometric scenario where you use your fingerprint as activation data to unlock a public-private private key pair on a device. We are looking at that scenario as well. We just haven't actually had vendors come up to us in that space just yet. And then maybe what the core of this build is actually, from a standards perspective, the EMVCo 3D Secure 2.0. So in full disclosure, we were just made aware of this standard probably 3 or 4 months ago. This is a standard that's currently out and was developed by a lot of the big credit card heavyweights in the industry. So Visa, American Express, MasterCard, they're all in on this standard. And the standard lays out a really good framework for doing some of the web analytics and for handling these authentication scenarios. And so we are currently looking at that standard as a sort of framework for this project. So one thing that we would be very interested in talking with this community about is if you have worked with this standard, if you've implemented this standard, if you see industry traction for this standard, we'd love to talk with you about how that has been and what you've seen. What are the primary benefits of this build? Why are we doing this for this community in the first place? As all the projects at the center ultimately get back to, we're trying to reduce risk with the assumption that reducing risk will translate into dollars for those reduced expenditures for those organizations. And so in this case, we're trying to reduce the risk of fraudulent card-not-present e-commerce transactions. So that's the core. I will say that we are sort of leaving it up to the entities to sort of figure out how they measure that, right? The center, as much as me, who has a business major, loves to talk about return on investment and value propositions, that's really for every organization to decide for themselves. But with the standards that we implement, with the diversity of authenticators that we implement, with the commercially available technology we implement, we like to think that we can provide a flexible, modular architecture here that would support a wide range of infrastructures and would allow organizations to get that ROI. So some of the other benefits are pretty self-explanatory here. We're obviously trying to increase the assurance that they have in their authentications of their consumer identities, right? So if you looked at 863 R3, taking things from maybe what might be a level one of authenticator assurance up to like a level 2 of authenticator assurance, or maybe if the consumer base is very security centric, maybe up to a level 3. Security alerts from web analytics and risk engines. In this case, we're just looking to use these for the fraud benefits, but they might have other benefits within the organization. And then the ability to automate some of these risk decisions in the sort of the real-time aspect of this. That's one of the things that we hear a lot, sort of making risk decisions at runtime. And so we're trying to show, especially for small and medium retailers who might not have these capabilities, right? I mean, to be quite frank, the big guys, right, the Amazons of the world, it's likely that they're going to be ahead of the curve on this, and they're going to have their own custom solutions. But especially for the small guys who say, how do I make sure that these decisions are made at runtime, that they're stopped right then and there when the user's trying to conduct that transaction? Just quickly to show you where we're at in sort of the life cycle for this effort. I won't go into all of this, but you guys will get this slide deck online or from me later on. This does go through a lot of the life cycle of an NCCoE project. So right now we're underneath this organize, engage, and we're at these sort of select partners and collaborators and sign creatives. So as I mentioned earlier, if you are a IT vendor and you have tech that you think is applicable to this project, any of the components that I just talked about, we'd love to talk with you. We'd love to hear your opinions on this space. We'd love to talk with you and get a demo of your technology and what you're doing. We think that IT vendors are great proxies for their consumer base. You are completely invested on solving their use cases, and so we'd love to talk with you about what those use cases are and what's top of mind for your customers. That very much matters to us. And I won't get into the details, but at the center, we, with all of our collaborators, we sign what's called a collaborative research and development agreement. So that's a thing for the lawyers to handle, but that keeps us all on the same legal playing field. So we are in the process right now of signing some of those creators and bringing companies onto our build team. So if you engage with us afterwards and you talk with Bill Newhouse, who's the project lead, he'll give you a heads up on who's actually already signed up here, and maybe some of those technology vendors are ones you're familiar with, or ones that if you're a technology vendor yourself already have relationships with that can be leveraged. And then, as I mentioned earlier, the end result of any project is a NIST SP 1800 series. We're anticipating probably early 2018 that we'll have a SP in draft form out for this project. So a build done, all the characteristics, security characteristics and capabilities implemented, and a complete how-to on how we actually develop this solution and implement it into our lab environment out for public comment, for just general public comment, as NIST does with all other SPs. And then if you want to join our community of interest, if you are actually a member of the retail community, so we sort of separate our industry engagement into build team members who are the technology providers and the standards and best practice developers that want to get into the lab and build with us, and then the people we're building the solution for, the retail community. So in this case, if you're a member of the retail community, you can reach out to us at that link, and we will get you hooked into our regular conference calls and email distributions to give you updates on the project. And if you have any other questions or concerns, every email address on an NCCoE website is 1 degree of separation from us project leads, so you will get us if you actually email us. You could stop by that address. That is actually in this main campus. We will not be there, so I wouldn't recommend it, but if you're sending us mail, please send it to there. And then please check out our website or give us a call. So with that, I believe I have a few minutes left over for questions or comments on the project. Okay, then we will take another short break. You will see more of me, so I hope that I'm impressed with talk number 1. And we're going to our mobile application single sign-on and multi-factor authentication for mobile applications. And that one we actually have a demo for you guys that we're pretty excited to show off. So I would encourage you to take your quick bio break and then come back and hang out with us a little bit more. Thanks, guys.